Okay, Hebrews chapter 11. Last week we talked about, we introduced the subject of faith in the bigger umbrella of salvation, how we experience salvation. When I say experiencing salvation, I'm talking about how do we experience God's wholeness, His fullness, His deliverance, His healing, all the things that fall under that umbrella. So I want to go back to Hebrews 11. I'm going to move through it here just for sake of time. But just want to read a couple of verses today, and we're talking about Abraham, and last week we read out of Romans 4, where it talks about those who follow in the steps of our father Abraham while he was uncircumcised. So the idea is that we're kind of working off of, we're going to look at the steps of faith that Abraham took before his circumcision, and then the steps of faith he took after his circumcision. Now, using Abraham because he is the preeminent example of faith. He's the one that the Scripture holds up to be the father of faith. And so let's just start with him. But I think we may, if Hebrews 11's warming up on me, I'm kind of warming up to it, we may just stay in Hebrews 11 with other fellas too. But let's go to verse 8, if we could. It says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Now, I don't know if here's what kind of stuck out to me. I mean, Hebrews 11 has what I would call some pretty significant acts of faith. Probably one that sticks out to me is Noah. By faith, being warned about things unseen, built the ark. I mean, that's pretty, it's a 120-year endeavor. I think we believe that it had never even rained upon the earth up until this point. So for him to build the ark, I mean, that's a significant step. There's other, by faith, Moses, fled Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king because he's pursuing something of the unseen. I mean, it's a big one. Then later on, it doesn't really mention specific names, but it says, by faith, men conquered kingdoms, put foreign armies to flight, raised the dead. I mean, you hear what I'm saying? I mean, this is, probably rightly so called the Great Hall of Faith, okay? Because these are some of the most significant acts of faith, at least we see in the Old Testament. So I kind of feel like it's interesting, and maybe sometimes overlooked. It just kind of hit me. I don't know if it was this morning or yesterday morning, where dealing with Abraham, at least initially, it doesn't look like this is a great act of faith. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise in tents. Or we can say he dwelt in tents in the land of promise, okay? I mean, that's by faith he did that. I mean, when you kind of put that in contrast to, by faith Noah builds the ark that saves all of mankind, and yet by faith Abraham lived in tents, sometimes it looks like there may be a pretty difference of degree of how significant this faith really is or how great it really was. But I kind of want to maybe propose this morning that statement that by faith he dwelt in tent is saying something, if not even more impressive than by faith Noah built the ark, okay? And so I've just been kind of meditating on it, and I want to kind of bring it out today. And all of a sudden, tent dwelling became almost another big meta theme, and it's hard to kind of find out where to enter again. So if it's kind of disjointed, just kind of take it for what it is. But I'm wanting to communicate something here, that this mode of living that Abraham took on was really, at least let's say today, in juxtaposition between a Western lifestyle and Abraham's lifestyle. There is a tremendous contrast between these two lifestyles. And what does dwelling in tents mean? Now, at first you may just think, well, I thought they all just dwelt in tents, but that's not the case. I mean, they lived in cities, and Abraham was a city dweller until he became a tent dweller. And so I want to kind of focus on that a little bit this morning and look at the idea, what was it in Abraham's what did it say about his disposition here? Now, I remember last week I mentioned to you that the first step of faith, and we're going to continue on, that Abraham, it said, God called him in Genesis 12. We're not going to go back to it. I'll just quote it, where he says, leave your country, leave your father's house, and leave your family, and go to a place where you don't know, but it's going to be, I'm going to give it to you. So we talked about the call to separation, but not just a separation, but today I want to focus and maybe call it more of a detachment. Christianity uses a word a lot called surrender. So we could literally say maybe the first act of faith is the step to surrender, or a faith that leads to surrendering, but also a faith that leads us to detach from the things that maybe have been previously important to you, but that you're going to give these things up because of maybe a greater desire or something greater that God has for you. And what I was talking about is sometimes we try to hold on to both worlds, simultaneously. God calls us, but we kind of like the life that we have, and instead of us giving up things, we just tend to try to incorporate Jesus into our already present living life. Does that make sense? In other words, he just becomes part of our life rather than somehow we're making changes or giving up or sacrificing, because what we're going to see is basically every step of faith that Abraham took in the 7 steps we're going to look at was ascending degrees of sacrifice all the way to the final step of faith where he offered up his son Isaac, okay? Now, here's the thing. When we're talking about sacrificing, giving up something for the Lord, kind of in the West, it's more like just giving up destructive habits, okay? Well, I quit doing this, and, I quit drinking, I quit smoking, I quit doing destructive habits for the Lord. But that's not what this is saying here. This is not just people giving up destructive habits. This is a call that is giving up of things that at some point in my life I have held and hope, and maybe even in the present, of great value. These things are important to me. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not even trying to be critical here, but one thing I don't really see much in the West is great sacrificing. Even though the West are big givers, they tend to give out of abundance anyway. They're not like the widow woman. Okay, she had people were giving great amounts of money, but Jesus said they're just giving out of their abundance. But this lady, she gave it all, right? So she only had 2 mites, but it was all she had, 2 pennies or whatever a mite was worth. So even though there may be giving, it's all relative to what a person has, right? And so in the West, here's the reason why. Because the West has a certain ideology, and maybe you don't see it as an ideology, but if you look at the definition of consumerism, it actually throws in there an ideology, okay? In other words, it's a philosophy of life that we have in the West of consumerism, which basically means this, that we believe that happiness is found in acquisition or acquiring things. In other words, we're a culture, not only economically do we believe that people need to buy things, but even personally, we are a people that believe in acquiring things. It is amazing to me that most of our life is in purchasing things that we probably don't even need most of the time, right? You go to Africa, they don't have stores on every corner. You know what I'm saying? They live in a way that basically they live by necessity only. Whatever they need is what they have. Does that make sense? In other words, the tent dweller, let me just kind of tie it back to the tent. The tent dweller is maybe something like this. You only carry with you what is necessary, because that's all you can do, right? And so the idea here is that this giving up of things, this letting go, here's the thing. What hurts us spiritually is our unwillingness to let go of things. Like I said, we're easy to maybe, not even easy. Sometimes we're willing to let go of bad things, but to let go of things that maybe God had given you even as promises is what's happening here. In other words, this is not just letting go of something you didn't really like. This is letting go of something that God may have already given you and gave it to you. Does that make sense? It's somehow God, this kind of faith is literally giving up of things that maybe God at one time had blessed you with. We can see that in Isaac, obviously, right? But it's our failure to let go when God puts his finger on it or calls you maybe to a deeper lifestyle, to remove things that maybe are becoming hindrances or like obstructions to spiritual development. When he puts his finger on it to remove that, at that moment is the moment of decision. Are you willing to let it go, or are you going to cling to it? Now, kind of maybe in the bigger picture with Jesus, Philippians 2 is a very good example, where it said he did not cling to, in Philippians 2, he did not cling to his rights, but emptied himself, right? And taking on the form of a servant. So, maybe paraphrase here, Jesus did not cling to his rights as God. He did not cling to his rights that he had in heaven or in the world in which he came from the above. He let go, that he became what? In the form of a person. He tented, basically some translations in John 1 would say he tented among us, and he emptied himself, and he became a servant, even a servant unto death, right? He humbled himself even unto death. Are you with me? So here's the idea, that even our salvation, the fact that we are saved, is based on the fact that someone, namely Jesus, was willing, let's say, not to cling to things that were already his, but was willing to do what? Empty himself. And so the tent life, I would say this, is the emptying of ourselves for the sake of doing what? Well, being filled with him. Amen? Being filled with him. Now, this is not unusual to Christianity. This is the demand of Christianity. I mean, it's like Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his book, Cost of Discipleship. He said, when Jesus bids a man to come, he bids him to come and die, right? See, what is weird is, I mean, I was, in part of my history, I told you, I'd at least early on, in my late teens and early 20s, and I was kind of involved in what was called the faith movement back then, okay? I mean, in Tulsa, I mean, it was all the great guys of faith. And I owe a lot to them. I'm going to be honest with you. I owe a lot to them. I mean, they pulled me out of sometimes negative thinking, and it built trust and built some confidence to believe God for things. And you know, if God offers healing, then to believe God for healing. I mean, there were some good things in that. But I want to tell you something. In some weird way, though, even some of that teaching became almost consumerism too. It became the acquisition of things rather than the denial of things. It was almost believing God to give more, but it was somehow spiritually disguised. Somehow our materialism or our greed was kind of spiritually disguised in the fact that it was really built out of greed, wanting more, rather than a faith that causes me to give more. Does that make sense? Faith, let me just put it this way. Faith is demanding of me to surrender those things which stand or possibly stand between me and him. So when Jesus calls a man, what does he call him? Come and do what? Take up your cross. If any man follow me, let him take up his cross. Let him deny himself, right? Or how about this one? When Jesus called the apostles, or which were then the disciples, who was it? Peter and or James and John, whoever, the two fishermen, I'm getting them confused. James and John, okay? When he called them, what did he say? He didn't incorporate himself into their life. Hey, look, I'm going to hang out with you guys and become a fisher with you guys. I'll go out on the boat with you guys, and y'all just continue on and just let me be a part of some of the decision making. No, Jesus said what? Come follow me, right? And I'll make you, that's a key word here, I will make you into fishers of men, okay? So what is he saying? Leave this, and it said, in fact, the next verse said what? They left their nets, their occupations, and followed him. With Abraham, leave, I will make you a father. With the apostles, leave, I will make you fishers of men. So what's my point? God calls us out because he desires to make us into something. Right? It's part of our development. The first step of faith then is what? Leaving. Leaving. What I'm saying is, it stands very much in contrast with today, which is more about acquiring, building up, having more. Now listen to me for a second. What is it that is in the person that strengthens him or enables him to let go of things? Now, church, have you ever decluttered your house before? You just go for it, right? In some weird way, it's freeing, isn't it? I mean, have you ever done it? But I'm going to tell you something. Here's how it goes with me. So I'm looking at it, and maybe it's something. I don't know what it is. Something. It's got value because I bought it, but it's in storage. So go figure. Now, some of you are even worse than me. You've got storages even off your property and other storages, okay? This is all Eason confined to my little deal. But it's got value. Maybe it's I can't even think of something that's foolish. But whatever it is, it's got value. I bought it, but I didn't use it. Maybe it's a light fixture. Or maybe, it's something like that. Have you ever looked at that? You've not even seen it for years and years, but you looked at it and you think, you know what? I could throw this away, but I might need it one day. Okay? And then when you need it, you're going to wish you hadn't thrown it away. That's how you think, isn't it? And so what you do is you just stick it back on that dusty shelf, and it stays for another 10 years. Okay? But if you'll take those things that you purchased and you throw them away, or you give them away, I'm going to tell you something. And you declutter your garage, you declutter your storage building, you declutter your house, you declutter your kitchen. I mean, you declutter. Don't you feel good? I mean, isn't there something very psychologically freeing in that? Have you ever experienced that? We decluttered a couple of places on the campus here this last week, and there was a drawer there. It had like 50,000 Tupperware lids in it, but there was only 10 Tupperware containers in the whole kitchen. Okay? That's what I'm saying. Now, you may look at that Tupperware lid. You may be of the sort that looks at that Tupperware lid and says, doggone it, someday I'll have something that this will fit. I'm keeping it. Okay? Or you just get rid of it, right? That's what I'm saying. Here's my point. When you declutter your life, freedom comes. When Abraham moved from the land of the city of Ur and became a tent dweller, I can just assume he decluttered his life. It's the same way with some of y'all decided you want to start living in an RV. 90% of your furniture is not going with you, right? Just by nature of the very fact of it, okay? But this is not just some exceptional case out there. This is actually something, one of the first steps of faith is actually Jesus is calling you to declutter your heart. And to declutter it, you're going to have to start giving up some things. And some of those things you're going to find very valuable to you, or they have been valuable to you. Maybe you've built your identity around it. Maybe you've done a lot with it. Maybe God even used it to do great exploits of faith. But at a certain point, God puts his finger on it and says, that's not going with you anymore. And it's at that moment that you're going to decide whether you're going to go deeper with him or you're going to be possessed by your possessions. Right? I mean, isn't the rich young ruler kind of a good example there too? Jesus calls the guy. I'm going to tell you what makes the story so powerful to me is that the scripture put this in the text. When he asked the rich young ruler to follow him, it said that Jesus loved him. I mean, it's like it took a special note and said that Jesus loved this guy. He had to come. Have you ever just met people that your heart you just kind of love them immediately? There's just something about them. There was just something about that guy that Jesus was attracted to. And Jesus calls him, says, follow me. He couldn't do it because, well, Jesus said, you got to sell all that you have to follow me. And the guy, he couldn't sell all he had because he said he had great possessions. Right? Now, the fact of the matter is, he clung to it, didn't he? Now, see, we look at that hindsight and think, oh, my gosh, what was the guy thinking? But I want to tell you something. You can't judge that guy because I can tell you something. We cling to things that have nothing to do with hardly any possessions. I mean, we're clinging to it. It's like that, well, with Clint Eastwood, I'll cling to it with my cold, dead fingers kind of a thing, right? That's why hoarding is a psychological problem, because it's something about this discontentment, this emptiness that's trying to be filled. You're trying to fill your heart with things. So the tent life is basically, in principle, somehow circumcising us to the materialism that somehow dominates us, and especially in the West, because we live in a culture of acquisition, and Jesus is calling us into a culture of sacrifice. It is diametrically opposed to one another. Are you with me? I mean, sometimes I'm not anti-American in the least. I mean, I love the country and I love my life. But here's the thing. The temptations we have sometimes are far worse than some of the temptations in other cultures, because where we're tempted is basically with this idea of materialism and having things, when that in other countries don't struggle that well with it, are not as tempted with that. I mean, I'm going to tell you something. How bad has it gotten? We have taken one of two of the most sacred days of Christianity and turned it into our nation's biggest spending day, and that's Christmas. You hear what I'm saying? I mean, we have taken it. The American culture has so intertwined in Christianity that our most sacred day of Jesus, the one day we celebrate as being born, has become the biggest buying season in our country. And so how we got where we're supposed to give like the wise man to turn it into great acquisitions, to buy that one thing that we've always had to have. Are you with me? Okay, that's one thing. But let me bring something else about the tent life. I don't know if I can make the transition and not cause a little confusion. But what we see with Abraham is now the tension between things temporal and his longing for things eternal. Notice what it said. He was in the land of promise, but he was looking for something that God was making. Okay? So here's my point. Let's see if I can say it real easy. Faith leads me to detach from things temporal so that I may take hold of things eternal. Okay? Paul said whatever is seen is what? Temporal, and whatever is unseen is eternal. Paul said it this way in Colossians. Do not think about things on the earth, but think about things in the heavens, right? Paul also said this in Philippians. He said, people are enemies of the cross if all they think about are earthly things, for our citizenship is in heaven. What is the contrast he's making? He is saying that do not concern yourself with only things of the earth, but begin to concern your things with things of heaven. You're with me? So what is he saying? That faith, if it's true faith, what should be happening is that the things of this earth, as the old song used to say, should become strangely dim, and God becomes strangely aware. You know what I'm saying? In other words, my heart begins to detach from things of the world and begins to attach to the things of the Lord. Is that a good way of saying it? My perspective, my intention, my disposition. So here's the deal. Abraham's disposition shifted. He was a person, an idolater in the land of the Chaldeans, but now he became a follower of God in the land of promise, still seeking for that which is from God himself. So faith causes me not to just surrender for surrender's sake, but to detach from the things of this world that I may embrace the things of heaven. Have I said it enough different ways? It's almost like we're all professional, like Jesus said, pearl swappers, right? He said the kingdom of heaven is like a great pearl that when a man finds it, he sells everything that he has, okay? But that's what we are. We're pearl swappers. We're constantly giving the good over for the best. God constantly is asking me to give this away so that this can be apprehended. And then one day, apparently, according to in the principle thing, that when I find the thing of great value, which is God himself, I am willing to sell everything that I may purchase the one thing. Right? Or I'm like the guy in the field. I have the field. I find the treasure of great worth. I go and sell everything to purchase the treasure. What is he saying? That in this world, there is a faith that detaches me from the things temporal and begin to cause me to seek the things eternal. And it's represented in the fact that Abraham dwelt in a tent. It's showing the disposition of his heart, that the things of this world have no longer he is no longer attached to the things of this world. Now his attachment is to seek the city which God is building. Does that make sense? Now, let me say this. Honestly, in Buddhism, they get it more than I think in Western Christianity. The first tenet of Buddhism is this. Do you know what it is? Everything temporary. Everything temporary. The impermanence of everything. What does that mean? Nothing lasts. The second tenet is connected to the first. Life is suffering. Now, that's why sometimes Buddhism is not seen as a very positive, worldview, because in some ways it's called nihilistic. It has that negative bent to it. Nothing lasts, and life is suffering. It's not much different than the Road Less Traveled book, where he opens up with the very first phrase, Dr. Peck, life is difficult, okay? So what they're saying is this. Now, here it is. I'm going to see if I can explain it. It's not difficult. I just got to see if I can explain it right. The reason why you suffer, as far as the second tenet, is because you're too busy trying to cling to the temporal. In other words, most of your irritations, most of your disappointments, most of your frustrations, most of what causes you angst is because you're wanting something that doesn't last. And when it's not lasting and you lose it and it comes out of your grip, then it causes you pain. You can look at it, let's say even in a marriage, okay? This is legitimate. I'm not saying you shouldn't be grieved. But if your world is built around a person and a relationship with that person, that's all your world is. If that person is removed, your world falls apart, right? I've seen that. I got to be honest with you. A person dies, their whole world falls apart, never even recovers, the other person. Because their whole world was wrapped up in that individual. Okay? What Buddhism is saying is this. Well, anyone should know that that relationship is not going to last forever. You know there's an end to it. 15 years, 10 years, tomorrow, everything could change. Why are you concentrating your whole life on things that are not going to last? But that's not just Buddhism. That's what Christianity is saying. It just gets lost in the West because we don't see it that way. But what Paul is saying too is quit seeking the things of the earth and start setting your mind on things above. Because all of our frustrations are really seeking the things which are not going to last in our life. They do not bring lasting happiness. And I'm going to tell you something. Not any one thing that you can point to in the seen world, whether it's the person sitting next to you or the person around the corner or anything in your house, cannot bring you happiness. I mean, to me, it is kind of shocking. But in some ways, it's like, when are we going to learn that when we see the wealthy and the popular and the fame, the people that we think have it all together, when they commit suicide, why can't we just come to realize that what they discovered was that nothing in this world can make you happy? I mean, right, isn't that right? I mean, I didn't even watch the CNN guy, Anthony Bourdain. I didn't see it. I mean, sometimes I saw him on CNN, one of the last guys that committed suicide, or the Spade lady. But I remember when I saw him, I had this thought. Call me shallow, but I had the thought, okay? I said, my God, this guy's like the Marlboro Man. I mean, he's an author. He's good looking. He travels the world. All he has to do is eat fine foods and talk to people. He's like the #1 guy on CNN. I mean, the guy in the way of the world, that guy had it together. #1 author, chef. I mean, his portfolio was huge. But not enough to keep the rope from going around his neck. I mean, we look at Robin Williams, probably one of the most successful guys in the world as far as in his field. I mean, dual successes in theater and entertainment and the big screen and the small screen. I mean, he's very successful, but we can't quite see why someone like that seemed to have what we would think the things of this world do not think life is worth living one more day. Well, all we can really say is this. At least they discovered that all things temporary. And suffering comes when you build your life around the first tenet. All things temporary. Now in the East, there's one more point I want to make about it, and then I'll wrap it up. But there's this idea, and the reason I even refer to it is I'm not promoting. I'm not wanting you to go, run over to the Far East and figure it out. But I got to hand it to them in some ways that they at least get this. And another idea is called the illusory of everything. Okay. Now, that when we talk about illusion, we're not talking about the fact that I think it exists and it doesn't exist, like this pulpit or something. But in their thinking, and even in some early Christian mystic thinking too, there is degrees of existence, okay? That there are things more real than other things. And you believe this, believe it or not, because I'm going to tell you something. What is the really real? What is ultimate reality? Is God, right? I mean, God is ultimate reality. He's the really real. And then everything kind of beneath him, from the infinite to the finite. And then we kind of work ourselves back maybe all the way to I see a rock. But when I see a rock, the rock exists, and it does actually have reality to it. But when I compare it to God, there's no comparison, right? Because there's the really real, and then there's like the rock, which is kind of like the lowest type of reality that we have. And then there's ascensions and degrees of the real. You're higher than the rock, I'm telling you, and you're higher than your puppy, and you're created in the image of God. All I'm saying, there's gradations of what they call, gradations, I should say, of reality and what is really real. Here's the point. So many of us are putting our efforts in the lower degrees of reality, and it's an illusory world. It's promising you things that it cannot deliver. It is promising you happiness. It is promising you all kinds of things, but it doesn't deliver. And when you come to that realization, then depression and anxiety begins to set in, because the things we were hoping for is not coming to pass. Are you with me? What God is saying, what Abraham is he gave up that, and he is going for the ultimate reality. He's seeking God. And even though he's living in the land of promise, he wasn't even drawn to the land of promise. He didn't want God's promises. He wanted God. Now that's even more amazing, isn't it? I mean, we're trying to get a hold of God's promises. He didn't even want the promise. He wanted God over the promise. Now sometimes we'd say this growing up, the gift or wanting the giver rather than the gift, and saying the same thing. But even Christianity can get caught up in the promises of God, what God has for you. But God is calling you to come out. He's calling you to detach. Isaiah says this, why do you spend your money for what does not satisfy? I mean, the two top things in the book of Ecclesiastes that breeds despair and this feeling of emptiness, and ultimately Solomon said he hated life, are these two things. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is permanent. And nothing satisfies. The eye cannot be satisfied with seeing. The ear cannot be satisfied with hearing. Nothing is permanent. Nothing lasts. But yet, when my heart is towards those things, then I find myself, and I'm going to tell you something. I'll make 2 points here. Consumerism, this feeling of needing more and having more, is destroying our nation mentally. You know that, right? I mean, our young people, they're up I read the one that we're up 1,000% with our young people now in psychotropic drugs. I mean, our young people we're having to dope them up to keep them sane. I mean, almost half of Americans are on some form of psychotropic drug now. 80% of all Americans has to take at least one pill a day to keep moving in their world. What are we saying? That this life of abundance, this life of acquisition, the ideology of consumerism to just get more and more is literally destroying our lives. And God calls us out of it, says, leave the land and I'll show you and I'll make you into something great. Right? And I can tell you something, it's just as rotten in the church as it is outside the church. I mean, I'm no saint at any level. I have my own idols I contend with, but I want to tell you something. Even Christianity in the West has become a means of great gain for people. A great gain. My point is this, where are the sacrifices being made? Where have you ever said no to something of value and said yes to Christ? I mean, I don't beat on the idea of giving. That's why we didn't even pass an offering. But I want to tell you something. It's seen. It can be seen in just your giving. I mean, we live as though there's no tomorrow. You put your security in things. I mean, most of y'all seen, at least the older people, seen Schindler's List? The thing that blew me away in Schindler, the thing that still haunts me today, is here you have these Jews that were wealthy. They had nice houses, fine artwork, tons of money, and it was all stripped away in a matter of weeks, and it became worthless to them. And Schindler offers them pots and pans. He said, you're going to need this. They were arrogant and said, no. They had suitcases of money. Schindler's offered them pots and pans. They scoffed at him, and 1 week later, their money meant nothing. They should have taken the pots and the pans. What are we saying? Your 401ks, whatever you think is there for you tomorrow, if you got your heart set on that, it would be awesome if it does last. But I'm going to tell you something. It can all go away tomorrow. All tomorrow. I mean, 2 buildings fall in New York City. What? 2 out of what? 50,000 in America? 2, and it cripples our economy for weeks? Is that not more astounding? That 3,000 people die in 2 buildings out of who knows how many high-rises are in America, and it literally causes bankruptcies all over America? What I'm saying is, that's how fragile it really is. And that's nothing. My point is this. Abraham, faith, here it is. Let me make it up. Helps you trust God and find your security in Him, because that's what the tent life is. I find my security in Him. I seek first the things of the kingdom, His righteousness. And then what? All these other things. But I'm not possessed by those things. I can give those things up. I don't need those things. I'm going to tell you something. I end with just my personal illustration, but it's a very fuzzy line, church, between the Lord giving and taking away and you just releasing it. I'm not for sure how it all works. Sometimes the Lord just takes it from you because you're unwilling to let it go, okay? Probably the rich young brother probably lost everything in the invasion of the Titus and the Romans in AD 70. He probably wished after that, he probably lost everything in that deal. He probably wished he'd have followed Jesus at that point, okay? Just 30 years later, it all came to nothing in Israel. So what he is a young brother, he's 55 years old, probably everything that he worked for was probably taken away from him anyway. The same way in Germany with the Jews. But, so sometimes the Lord just taketh away. Just like he did with Job. And sometimes he's expecting you to be willing just to obey him and to give it away. But when he puts, the closest thing that I can see in my life is the church here. You know, and over the history of the church here. And there were so many seasons of good things in the church. We had dark periods too. But we also had good periods, some wonderful periods. I mean, periods that we're just thinking heaven is just fixing to open up right in us and we're going to be raptured out of here like Enoch or something. And great promises were given. And let's just say, I've told you all this before. But I'm going to tie it into this one now. Is that let's just say out of the 100 promises that God gave us as a body, maybe only one was right, or maybe one half of one that someone actually heard from the Lord. But it only takes one promise, right? It only takes one. One promise with God is everything. Okay, so maybe I just brush off 99%. I'm saying, you know what? People were in the moment, were excited, and thought they would just say, "Thus saith the Lord." Okay. But I can't brush off all of it. I got to at least hold on to 1% because I kind of feel I still believe in God promisings, right? So when I feel like the Lord began to take it away, and obviously it's all entwined in human decisions and what we do and the decisions that we make. I get it. It's nothing totally, you can't just separate from who we are as a people. So it's not even a blame. It's not saying, all I'm saying is, whatever the reason was, God decided to take it away. Now, I want to tell you something. This is what's more confusing to me. It's not having nothing to do with you guys. But, as just a good old sinner, you know what I'm saying? There are seasons in my life that I feel like I'm a little more together than other seasons, okay? Like, I'm doing, there's just sometimes you just know you're not doing totally right, but there's other seasons where you feel like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, seeking God, pressing in, praying. There's those times, And I think what got me was, there would have been 100 other reasons why I think God could have yanked it from me, but it's like he decided to yank it when I thought things were going at its best. See, that's the problem. When things were going good, he decided he was going to take it. Now, I can tell you something. That giving it, that not clinging to things, and that the struggle, the anger that I felt, the rebellion that I felt, the broken relationships that come out of that, and all the messy stuff that comes as the Lord begins to take it from you. And it wasn't just me. Someone could just as easily say us. Okay? I can't speak for you. I can only speak for my end. To basically reduce, see, some of y'all don't remember, but on one of those Sunday mornings right over here, a lady stood up and she prophesied and she said, I'm sweeping the house. Okay? I'm sweeping the house. And she said, I'm going to start with the leadership. And now I'm thinking, honestly, probably lose a couple of families. Okay, a couple of my kids. You know what I'm saying? I didn't know he meant he was going to sweep the house. And I think the only reason I don't even know if I might have even got swept out too, or I was like that guy just hanging on to the threshold with, putting fingernail scratches in, okay? But I'm saying God warned, I'm not going to say he warned us, he just gave us a little update, I guess. And then in the back, about a month later, someone else stood up and said the same thing. Actually, it was even worse. It wasn't a judgment. It was just a matter of, this is going to happen. And there it happened. I know the thing that I've struggled with and had to work out over the last 7 years is the willingness to let go without letting it destroy my life. Okay? And it came very close. I'm going to tell you something. I was against what he called the reefs at times. But this, as a little illustration, so my office is in that brown house over there, okay? And so that's been my office for 15 years. So when we finally had to sell the property, okay, not only did we finally had to sell it because we didn't have the money to pay for it anymore. And so we sold it to Teen Challenge. So here's what's amazing. So in the agreement, now, listen to this. I asked them if I could keep my office, okay? I never even go in it anyway, but you know what I'm saying? You're holding on to something, doggone it. I don't want to leave. You know what I'm saying? I had my desk, my chair, my pens, my books. You know what I'm saying? I was holding on to it. And they said, okay, so they put it in the contract for sale. You get to keep your office. So here's the thing. So the day they took over the property, I had it all, that was a very hard day. That's when they show up and it's their keys now, and I've been here for 30 years. We've been a part of every single 2x4. You've been a part of everything. But when you got to hand the keys of the kingdom over, it was kind of tough. So we're in the offices. I had it all nice. I had it all cleaned up, had candles burning. And so the director then comes in, and he looks at my office and paraphrase, "That's the office I want." And I said, "Well," that's going to stay in my office. There was a little tension in that room now. That's my office because they told me I could keep it. And that was discouraging right there because mine is the nicest office, okay? And but I won the victory. I looked at the leader, and he said, "Yep, that's true." And that's my point. So about 3 weeks later, a month later, the Lord convicted me. He said, "That's not your office anymore, You're clinging to it. He needs it. He's the guy. He's the new guy. He's the director. He needs that. It's it. You know what I'm saying? That's the struggle in my mind." So I came on the campus. I drove to the campus that morning. And I'm not going to say his name. I said, "I just want you to know you can have my office." It was almost like that final pulling it from my fingers, isn't it? But I remember how, when I was fighting for it, honestly, it made me feel kind of yucky inside. Like I really didn't win. And so when I gave it, I freed it. Now, here is the interesting thing to that story. That was almost 3 years ago. And I didn't even ask, Chad. I didn't even ask for it. But Maynard said, "Do you want that office?" It's like the Lord then, after he pulls it from you, do you know what I'm saying? After he pulls it from you, to break whatever that little bit of idolatry or whatever that is, that pride or whatever, all that's so icky about us, but it's all there. Then when he knows you don't even want it, and you're free from it now, he gives it back. And so I've really remodeled it. It really looks even better than before. But here's the thing. My point is this. Even when you give it up, even when you detach yourself, even if you sold everything you had and gave it to the poor, and your disposition of your heart gets directed towards eternity and not just to the things of this world, God returned it back to Job. I don't know how many fold, but more than double probably. But this time, Job had a new experience with God. See? The Lord took it from him, but he gave it back. And Abraham was a very wealthy man too, okay? My point is that it's the disposition of your heart that faith is trying to work with at first. The ability to surrender, the ability to let go and not to cling to these things. Your rights, like Jesus, he did not cling to his rights. He emptied himself. He emptied himself. Are you with me? Amen.